Renaissance, which then is going to spread throughout all of Europe. And if you want to look at the main reason it spreads, we can jump right here to the printing press, but we'll come back to that. So we almost need to look at two things: why Italy and how the printing press comes about. If you look at those two elements, that should make sense. So let's look at the Eastern world, so to speak. So you've got the Chinese Empire, which we don't need to know anything more about that than that. You have India, which you don't need to know anything more than that. And then the Ottoman Empire, you need to know a little bit more about that. Know that the Ottoman Empire at this point controls what we consider the Middle East today, up through Turkey, and a good chunk of Eastern Europe. So we're not even talking about what we consider Eastern Europe today. And then also North Africa and even parts of Spain. So it's a vast, vast territory. What I put in just in this, if the marker was dying, is the plague, right? And then I put little asterisks just to show the influence of the plague. You don't even have to know that much about the plague, even though it's an interesting topic, because it's pre-1450. So if we just look at where the plague shows up on this mind map, you've got China, obviously, India, and that's due to it's just flowing through the trade routes. I have it with the 100 Years' War and pointing to the middle class, and then I have it with wealth in the Italian city-states. I'm pretty confident, based on what I've read from you guys and your contextualization of the Renaissance, that you are making the connections between the plague and wealth and what that took place. I think our simulation said I have it. How's it going? Is it working good? All right, good. All right, so let's start with China and its specific, what's the word I'm looking for? Goods, services, gunpowder, and the idea of printing. So gunpowder, as we see, is going to be used as a catalyst for the technology of the cannon. And then the movable type printing is going to be the background catalyst for the effect of the Renaissance going to a new technology of the printing press. So hang on to that thought for later. India, the main thing is going to be spices. In the John Green video, we talked about Europeans using pepper to preserve their food to make it taste better. So we got spice of that. And then we did this simulation in class, is that the Ottomans basically become the middlemen of society. And as they're transmitting these goods, they're also transmitting knowledge of the classics through the Italian city-states. Why Italy? And in a normal class, I'd be hoping to pick this out of your brain, but we're trying to roll through this quickly. We looked at the importance of Venice, shipbuilding, geographical location. I always use the thing like just look at Italy itself. It's like a giant pier into the Mediterranean. It becomes the next middleman, so to speak, for that. So it's going to gather there. How then does Italy become wealthy? One has to do with the plague and the elimination of a lot of people, therefore more land and resources to spread around. But also, the Italian city-states, namely Venice and eventually Florence, Genoa, are going to be trading with the Atlantic city-states, which leads the Atlantic states to a giant question mark. They're not winning this trade war, right? The United States is in a trade war right now. They're losing this because they have to go through all these middlemen to get their goods. So this question is going to lead to the desire to explore the world. And we talked about Spain is going to be the newest of these nations. They're going to roll the dice and gamble on Christopher Columbus by investing in him to risk finding a westward path to Asia to get those goods. So why? Yeah, for the benefit of trade, but more importantly, once you start seeing the weaponization of Europe, such with cannon and other things, you're going to create an arm race. Iron and eventually steel and gunpowder. These nations are switching into a more Machiavellian type idea of what their existence is, which is to exist and stay stable. And they recognize, based on Machiavelli's own writing, having standing armies and technology is what you're going to need. Castle walls aren't going to do it anymore. Castle walls are destroyed. That's what the 100 Years' War taught us. I just want to since we're on the 100 Years' War, jump up to that middle class. We talked about that concept of the change of social status from just lord and serf to now an emerging middle class. As those lords are eliminated, who's left to then fight? You see the serfs elevated to positions of middle class. They also have to provide means for technology and means for cities to function. So they start to be just townspeople. And eventually they're going to have fun names. They're going to be called the gentry class in England. They're going to be called nobles of the robe in France. And then eventually, in later France, it'll be called the bourgeoisie. So those are all words for way down the line there. 100 Years' War, we start to see, thanks to Joan of Arc, the idea of nationalism and the existence of what we call the nation state as opposed to a city state. What makes somebody a nation? Here's the word from yesterday. Commonalities, a shared sense of each other. How do you know you have a shared sense with each other? One, geography. You put yourself into an arena with an imaginary line. Sometimes it's physical, but most of the time it has this imaginary line. And you share the same language. What's having the same language called? That's our vernacular word. How is the vernacular increased? Through shared writing, through the printing press, printing the same information for you to read and study constantly. I think we briefly talked about, like with 8th Hour, let's make fun of them real quick, even though they might watch this. When they all that one day went, I had no idea what they were doing, but they had a shared vernacular. Now that I know it, we have a stronger culture in that class because we're using the same terminology, even though we don't use that because it's creepy. They still don't have a greeting. One of the reasons I do the greeting with my class, which you guys have a great one, was good? Guess what we just have? We're starting to create a culture based on a shared common language, vernacular. We're getting there. It's important to have. All right, where am I at? Woo, rolling. I like doing this. And I had a lot of angst today, so this is helping. Did we talk about why they're wealthy? Yes. So what I want to just reiterate is the Italian city-states is the home of the Papal States, Italy, the Papal States, and Rome itself. Therefore, the Catholic Church is there. Therefore, the Catholic Church has already been and will continue to become very wealthy. It will become dominated by families like the Borgias, like the Medicis, and you're going to see them. Let's jump to something we really haven't talked about yet, into patrons. They're going to use their wealth to fund some of the most, I don't know what the word is, memorable art of all time, still to this day. The popes and people like them or other patrons are going to fund the School of Athens by Raphael, or the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo, or the Statue David by Donatello, which eventually Michelangelo does too and does it better. Or a lot of the works of Leonardo. So you're going to see this idea of patrons paying for the arts. Okay, so that's what that green line is emphasizing. So even though you're seeing the idea of secularism, non-religious ideas form, you're also seeing the secularization of the Catholic Church and using its wealth to create these images. And this gets a little tricky when you're talking about art with the Italian Renaissance, is even though it's secular, a lot of the created artworks are very religious in design because they're being funded by the Catholic Church. And even though they're becoming more secular, it's not this whole idea of atheism. That word doesn't exist yet. It's the idea of finding a balance between nature and God. This idea that God has revealed himself through nature, and that's what these guys are studying. Leonardo specifically, when we talk about that there. All right, where are we at? Petrarch, right? He's the lightning rod, studies the classics in the Italian city-states in the mid-1300s, 14th century. So studying the classics becomes known as classicism. It's also known as, if you say you're studying something academic, it used to mean that, studying anything Greek and Roman. Why? Because they had these great civilizations. And so humanism is this secular worldview of that humans can exist, not just for the benefit of the church and to get themselves into heaven, but humanism is to achieve virtue, which is the idea of achieving individual glory and greatness to better all of society. And so concepts of individualism, me and I existing as myself, as an identity. It's not to where we are today, but it begins. And this is connected directly back to exploration, because someone like Christopher Columbus could not have existed prior to the Renaissance, because the idea of individual existence wasn't there, to a degree. So his notion of why he wanted to do it was for his own self-glory, and his own self-glory being wealth and fame to everybody else, but he wanted to do it so he could be famous. So that's sort of this idea of individualism. You can look at the patrons of the arts too, so I might have this idea connected down here, is you'll start to see the first selfies. They didn't have cameras for in duck lips or whatever you guys do, but they certainly would sit there and pose and have these famous artists paint them so that they would live on forever through history. You're going to see that more, individualism, in the Northern Renaissance, actually, which is weird. In the Northern Renaissance, we'll say much more religious in its development. So far, up in anything we haven't, okay, we're down here. All right, so how does one go about attaining humanism or virtue in society? In the Italian city-states, I mean, feudalism is basically gone. So the strong, working, merchant, banking, middle class, I'm probably spelling this name wrong, and probably saying it wrong, but your test is always written, so you don't have to know how to say things right, is Castiglione. And he writes the Book of the Courtier, which is how to go about, in our modern sense, what we call civic humanism, how to be a productive member of society to achieve virtue, humanism. So civic humanism, and with that, we coined the phrase as to be the Renaissance man, to be good at theater, to be good at sports, to be good at math, to be good at science, to be good in the humanities. And what are the humanities? The study of Greek and Roman, and the development of understanding history, and also how to treat women correctly. And this will come up, I don't have it on there yet, is there's a huge thing with society. I'm going to add it for you right here. It has a French name, but I'm going to use the English. The debate about women. And that's exactly what it is. So one of the things is, can women achieve all these things that men are achieving in the Renaissance in terms of this breakthrough? And the answer is no. They can do some things. They can't paint like these guys. They can do like knitting and crafting and things like that. They have to have their place. That's better for society. And that's going to be a norm in Europe for a very long time. You'll see it change a little bit in the Reformation, but really not until the Industrial Revolution, and really not until after World War I, we would start to see the first wave of feminism. And then the second wave of feminism is after World War II, and I would say we're probably in the third wave of feminism going forward, but we'll see how we get with that. What else with that? So other effects I highlighted here. So you got technologically effects, printing press, huge effects. Political philosophy has to develop. You have to have a new way of thinking about how to rule based on the secular nature of society and all the wealth that's there, and the development of city-states and nation-states preparing for a different type of warfare. Who comes in with the examples of how to do that? Machiavelli and the Prince. We will see examples of Machiavellian tactics come to play. I'm pointing to Isabel and Ferdinand, but even they exist before he wrote that book. So perhaps he knew about them and wrote about them. Anybody heard of the Spanish Inquisition before? A lot of torture-y things. You'll see their tactics for sure. We'll look at Henry VIII and how he used tactics to get what he wanted. And his daughter, Bloody Mary, her nickname says it all. And then Elizabeth I, who's one of my favorite people in this class, who really challenges and answers this question right there, because she leads England to probably one of its glorious eras and defeats the strongest superpower at the time, which was Spain, because she didn't want to marry their son because he was married to her, and she's like, no, I'm not going to marry anybody. I'm the Virgin Queen. I'm going to marry the country. She really does. can't swear because it's on camera. She's awesome. I like Elizabeth. I'd probably have a crush on her if she was. Yeah. That was weird. She's been dead for 500 years. Okay, so I think we got just about everything except the idea of as it spreads to the northern regions, which would be Germany, Switzerland, don't go east, certainly France, and then certainly England, you see a transition. You're not going to have the same secular identity as you do in the Italian city-states. You're still going to have remnants of feudalism. You're still going to have the landed aristocracy like we had from the feudalism game with kings and queens and monarchs as opposed to the republics and oligarchs of the Italian city-states. So less wealth, you don't have to change that ethos. So Christianity, namely Catholicism, is going to be a dominant. However, because of the secularization of Catholicism, you can even go further back to the two popes and the Great Schism and some other challenges. You're going to see an idea called Christian humanism. Sort of the idea of, wait a second, we're now reading the Bible for ourselves, and we don't see a lot of things meshing with what the Catholic Church is saying and doing. So really, do you remember the trend of what would Jesus do? Just nod, because they can't see you nodding anyway. That's sort of, to get that going, is we should be living more like Christ-like for the sake of, because that's what Christ was, not because of some reward or punishment. This is what it is. So it's humanism, the same ideas, just they never lose the Christian idea. And you'll start to challenge and see reform of the Catholic Church. When those reforms don't go far enough, you're going to enter, which is our second unit, so we don't even have to get too naughty on it for this mind map, known as the Protestant. What's the root word there? Good. Reformation. What's the root word there?
Reform.
Yeah. Protest to reform. You can almost look at it that way. And that couldn't have happened without information. And it's going to create what I call the Humpty Dumpty of Europe. It's going to fall off the wall. People are going to double down on their beliefs based on whatever version of the Bible they enjoy, I suppose. And it's going to lead to a very, very bloody period in European history centered around both religion and politics. And it gets complicated with that. And so we'll sprinkle in some names here, like Erasmus, Thomas More, and then eventually you get to Martin Luther, John Calvin. Those are the big names. Even Henry VIII himself is going to be a Protestant reformer, even though he was like a hardcore Catholic. He didn't want to do it, but he needed a divorce. Why? To have a boy. Why? To make sure his country stayed united. So it's Machiavellian in a sense. All right, what up there don't? I think, did we nail everything? Anything up there we didn't talk about? Oh, naturalism? I don't think we said naturalism, did we? What's the root word? Yeah, so you see it, the idea of that art should reflect reality. And we'll talk about this in detail in the art slideshow, is that just as you're focusing on individuals, well, the individual should look natural. So you're trying to recreate art in its natural ways of like muscle tone. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci was a grave digger. He'd dig people up and cut their bodies apart to see how muscles worked and things like that to make sure he got everything right in his drawings. Awesome. I can't wait to show that slideshow because it's good stuff. So that's naturalism. And you see that a lot in the artwork of the Northern Renaissance. So the Northern Renaissance artwork tends to be less religious. It's kind of hard to really say. And then the art of the Protestant Reformation gets really heavy religious and kind of trippy, if that word still means anything. Like, just kind of out there. It's like apocalyptic. And if you come to the Art Museum field trip in May, you can see a lot of that. Or April, whenever we go. Woo! Hold on, that was cool. Now you have that for posterity saved. You can slow down my crazy voice. Nice. And that's only about half of one unit.